Shortstop, Francesa on the Fan, Yes Network on this Monday program. The winter meetings underway in baseball. We have them covered as soon as anything happens. The only thing that has happened so far is we learned last night that Jose Reyes had accepted a 6-year deal from the Marlins. Met boss Sandy Alderson joins us now. Sandy, welcome. How are you?
Hey, Mike. Doing fine, thanks.
Okay. First, your thoughts on the Reyes contract and how the whole Reyes thing came down. Are you surprised?
Well,
are you surprised that it went this quickly? Were you expecting it? Your contact? Just basically, outline for us what your contact was with them and what you think about what happened.
Right. Well, I think things went very quickly from Friday through Saturday night and Sunday. I was in contact with the Greenbergs as late as Friday and talked to them in general terms about some things that they might consider. Got some relatively positive feedback on Friday. By Saturday night, and this is after several additional phone calls, but clearly by Saturday night things had moved. And it was, I think, clear at that point that what we had been talking about conceptually was no longer a possibility. So things did move quickly over the weekend. I can't speculate about the Marlins' motivation to get it done, get it done before the meetings actually started, and what have you. It's conceivable that our involvement, at that point, Friday, Saturday, over the weekend, did spur some responsive activity by the Marlins and ended up getting it done. So, we had, Mike, this was not something where we just sat and were prepared to be reactive. We had thought about weeks earlier, what we might do, where we might go, and then felt that, we were going to have to sit and wait for the market to tell us if there was a window of opportunity to present something. And I sensed in the middle of last week that there was such an opportunity. We moved on it, and it turned out to be very temporary, and that ultimately the market, kind of accelerated away from us.
Do you feel that the Reyes camp fully understood your plan, and you at least got to present that to them, what you had in mind?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I do. I think that they understood where we were. I got some positive feedback, and I thought that Friday night going into Saturday there was a real possibility. Maybe the first time that I had felt that there was some real chance that this might work. But as I said, I think that whether it was because the Marlins sensed that we were now in it or for some other reason, things accelerated past us. And look, we took into account a variety of things. We knew it was going to be a long-term deal. We felt it was important to at least take into account the injury risk and take that into account in both as far as incentives were concerned, as well as the length of the contract. But the guaranteed money that we discussed with them was very significant, and with the incentives and with an option for a 6th year, would have gotten into $100 million. So, I felt it was a credible, legitimate discussion with them. And but as we found out, it went way beyond that.
We're talking with Sandy Alderson, Met general manager from the winter meetings in Dallas. Did the Reyes camp just tell you that they were moving on and signing, or did they give you a chance to counter and you passed?
Yeah, the latter.
Okay.
They didn't just tell me, hey, forget it.
Right. They asked you if you wanted to get involved.
They told me that what we had been discussing that Friday, early Saturday, by Saturday night, was no longer worthy of discussion because they had gotten past that. So,
gotcha.
Friday when the response is, well, gee, with some tweaking or with some, work with me, that kind of response, which was encouraging. By Saturday that was no longer a possibility because things had moved materially away from that.
We're talking with Sandy Alderson, Reyes now a Marlin. Obviously, a big turn of events for Met fans who have seen a franchise that has gone from a $19 million payroll to now taking high-priced free agents from the Mets, but that's the way the division has turned. We have all assumed, Sandy, and I think all of us have assumed Reyes would not be a Met. I mean, I don't think it comes as any shock to anybody in the New York community. I think all of us felt it was very, very slim, the chance of him returning. We've all assumed that Tejada automatically becomes the shortstop, but we haven't heard that from you guys. Is that what you would? Is that your feeling right now, that Tejada? I mean, obviously he has to battle whoever is the other person in camp, but is your feeling that Tejada will be your shortstop?
Well, I think that's a likely outcome, Mike. But I think that the nice thing about Tejada is he plays either shortstop or second very well. We've seen him at second, obviously, and because of Reyes' injury last year, we saw him quite a bit at short. So that does give us some flexibility, and in looking at what we have currently at second base, and then looking at either the trade or the free agent market at what might be available at either second base or shortstop as an alternative to Tejada, we have some flexibility. I think it's fair to say that Ruben's going to be one place or the other, but probably a little bit too early to say, look, he's the shortstop. But obviously, he's a significant a player for us, and somebody that gives us some comfort that absent something else happening, we've got a guy who can play short on an everyday basis.
Sandy, and the Mets fans have seen logical leavings like Beltran and K-Rod, and now one of their real favorites leaving in Reyes. How would you describe the plan going forward for this year and for the next couple of years? I think a lot of fans feel this is now becoming, considering the Met losses at the gate and losses and maybe the lingering shadow of Madoff and whether that or not plays a big role, who knows? But the idea of them losing a good amount of money last year, the year before, that there's this scorched earth policy going on with the Mets now, and that the Mets are going to go into a very, very tough period that will last years. How would you explain what you can verbalize, what you're targeting down there, and what your plan is in 2012 for this ball club?
Well, first of all, I don't think that we're going into a dark age period with the Mets. I've been saying for a long time that, in fact, from I think the very first day that I arrived in New York and took this job, was that the payroll was too high to sustain at the current levels of revenue. And so, the fact that you're seeing us go from, $145 million in payroll last year to around 100 or so this year, largely, I believe, to address just the problem with the business model on the baseball team, as opposed to Bernie Madoff or anything else. We need to get back to a point where we're closer to break even. And that would be true, Mike, for any owner. No owner can sustain losses of the magnitude that we had this year or have had over the last couple of years over any period of time. If somebody came in and bought the team, they wouldn't tolerate it either. In fact, there might be less tolerance for that than has existed here and will exist in the future. So that's something we absolutely had to address. But at the same time, if we can create some payroll flexibility, which comes from a variety of sources. It comes from having younger players. It comes from having fewer multi-year contracts. It comes from having less money concentrated in just a handful of players. If we can get to the point where we've got that kind of flexibility, then we have the ability to be creative, and we have the ability to add players as opposed to just subtracting them, and to add significant players. But right now, we have been overinvested and overcommitted in contracts either that make it difficult to spend money beyond those contracts, or the contracts just, we don't have productive assets. We don't have players that are even on the field. So, short term, we want to be as good as we can be, but we've got these imperatives that we have to deal with. And, people talk about rebuilding. It's not because when people rebuild, it's because they got a lousy team. Well, our team can be pretty good. If we can get some players back and get them productive again, I think that, we're not talking about a terrible team. We're talking about a team that can be entertaining and can be competitive. But make no mistake, what we're trying to do now, which may not have happened in the past, is to balance more the future with the present and make sure that the future can be brighter, if not, as bright as the current year. So are we trying to get younger? Are we trying to get more flexible? It's not, do we on a temporary basis have to get our payroll down? Yeah. If our payroll gets down to a more manageable level, and we can still put a good product on the field, we can still get people to come to the ballpark, then we can start growing that payroll again. I don't think the Wilpons have ever said they need to make money on the Mets, but you can't bleed and not at some point have a reckoning. And so, from our standpoint, we're trying to accumulate younger players, player assets. We made some trades in that fashion last year. In Jose's case, some people have said, well, gee, you should have traded him if you knew you weren't going to be able to sign him. In his case, we decided, look, this was something where we're going to take the risk. And, if we get a lower draft pick or a lower draft pick than we otherwise would have liked, maybe there's some other way that we can acquire players that will, spend the money that we would have spent on a first or a second round pick. So there are plenty of things that we're thinking about and looking at. But, the bottom line is,
you have to outlive basically, we're in a consolidation phase is what you're saying, and you're trying to basically live off some of these still. You can be a good $100 million team or a bad $100 million team based on what your assets are and how they're performing. You obviously have underperforming assets in Santana and Bay as examples that take up big drains on your payroll. So while you're not calling it a real cutback, you're saying you're in a consolidation phase, but don't you have to, in this town, you may have to spend money to make money in that teams need a little sizzle. How do you create a little sizzle and maybe some success at the same time without breaking the bank?
Well, it may be that we have to create the sizzle, sort of the old-fashioned way, and that's with younger players who become the franchise players, the homegrown players who create a bond with our fans and who ultimately are the reason that fans come back to the ballpark. Can we create that kind of sizzle in December? Well, Miami's doing it. Well, let's face it. Look at their situation. I don't begrudge them what they're doing. They got a new ballpark.
They want to fill a new ballpark.
They got to fill it.
Yep.
There's some questions about the location of the ballpark and so forth.
Right.
They've got to create some sizzle now, and they have the opportunity to do it because guess what? Their payroll expenses and other expenses are in line with their existing revenues, and they forecast improved revenues. So they're going to spend a lot of that new revenue on players. I mean, it's a sound business model.
I understand.
They're just at a different place than we are, and in their case, they're doing maybe what the Mets did several years ago in creating the sizzle in December and January, and selling off of that going into the season, and hopefully maybe disappointing people, notwithstanding all the hype in December or January.
Well, how do you sell the Mets a little optimism? How do you sell your fans some realistic optimism?